Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live completely disconnected from the modern world, where ancient traditions guide every aspect of daily life? Deep in the mountains of Mindanao, the Higaonon people have maintained their ancestral ways for over 1,000 years, but their story is one that demands our deepest respect and understanding, not our romanticized fantasies. Today, we're embarking on a journey to learn about the Higaonon tribe. But this isn't just another documentary about remote cultures. This is about real people with real challenges, real wisdom, and a way of life that's rapidly changing in our interconnected world. I'm going to share with you what makes the Higaonon people remarkable, but more importantly, why their story matters to all of us in ways you might never have considered. The name Higaonon itself tells us everything we need to know about their identity. It comes from the Cebuano words higa, meaning to reside, and gaon, meaning mountain dwellers. But this simple translation barely scratches the surface of what it means to be Higaonon in the 21st century. Nestled in the rugged terrain of northern Mindanao, primarily in Bukidnon province, the Higaonon communities have carved out an existence that most of us would find impossibly challenging. We're talking about areas where the nearest paved road might be hours away by foot, where electricity is a luxury, and where the rhythm of life follows the sun, the seasons, and the whispers of the forest. But here's where we need to pause and check our assumptions. When we hear about indigenous communities living in remote mountains, our minds often jump to images of primitive simplicity or mystical harmony with nature. The reality is far more complex and far more interesting than any Hollywood portrayal could capture. The Higaonon people are not living museum exhibits frozen in time. They're dynamic communities navigating the incredible challenge of preserving their cultural identity while adapting to a rapidly modernizing world. Some younger Higaonon individuals pursue education in urban centers, returning to their communities with new skills and perspectives. Others work to document and preserve traditional knowledge that might otherwise be lost. Their social structure is built around the concept of the datu, traditional leaders who serve not just as political figures but as keepers of wisdom and arbiters of justice. These leaders don't rule through force or wealth, but through demonstrated wisdom and community respect. Imagine living in a society where leadership is earned through character rather than inherited or bought. It's a concept that might seem foreign to those of us accustomed to modern political systems, yet it has sustained Higaonon communities for generations. The spiritual life of the Higaonon people centers around their relationship with nature and their ancestors. They believe in a complex spiritual world where every mountain, river, and forest has its own guardian spirit. Their rituals and ceremonies aren't performed for tourists or anthropologists. They're living expressions of a world view that sees the sacred in everyday life. One of their most important traditions is the Hubon, a peace-pact ceremony that resolves conflicts between communities or individuals. This isn't just about saying sorry and moving on. The Hubon involves elaborate rituals, the exchange of symbolic gifts, and the creation of lasting bonds between formerly conflicting parties. In a world where we struggle to resolve conflicts between neighbors, let alone nations, there's something profoundly important we could learn from this approach. Their agricultural practices demonstrate an intimate understanding of their environment that has been refined over centuries. The Higaonon people practice shifting cultivation, also known as slash-and-burn agriculture, but not in the destructive way this term often implies in modern contexts. Their methods involve careful rotation of fields, allowing forest areas to regenerate, and working with natural cycles rather than against them. They grow rice, corn, root crops, and vegetables using techniques that maintain soil fertility and biodiversity. Their knowledge of which plants to grow where, when to plant, and how to protect crops from pests comes from generations of careful observation and experimentation. This isn't primitive farming. It's sophisticated, sustainable agriculture that modern agribusiness is only beginning to understand. The Higaonon oral tradition preserves not just stories and songs, but practical knowledge about medicine, weather patterns, and resource management. Their epics, like the famous Darangan, contain within them maps of the spiritual and physical landscape that guide behavior and decision-making. These aren't just entertainment, they're encyclopedias of survival wisdom, but let's be completely honest about the challenges facing Higaonon communities today. Climate change is altering the weather patterns they've relied on for generations. Deforestation and mining activities are encroaching on their traditional territories. Younger generations are often torn between the pull of modern opportunities and the desire to preserve their heritage. The Philippine government has made efforts to recognize indigenous rights through laws like the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act, but implementation remains inconsistent. Some Higaonon communities have successfully secured ancestral domain titles, giving them legal control over their traditional territories. Others continue to struggle with land disputes and environmental degradation. Education presents both opportunities and challenges. While access to formal education can provide young Higaonon people with tools to navigate the modern world, it can also pull them away from traditional knowledge systems. The most successful approaches seem to be those that integrate traditional and modern education, allowing young people to be bridges between worlds rather than having to choose one or the other. Healthcare is another complex issue. Traditional Higaonon healers possess extensive knowledge of medicinal plants and healing practices that have sustained their communities for generations, but they also lack access to modern medical interventions that could save lives in emergency situations. The ideal solution isn't replacing traditional medicine with modern healthcare, but finding ways to integrate both systems respectfully and effectively. What struck me most in researching the Higaonon people is their resilience. This isn't a culture that's simply trying to hold back the tide of modernity. These are communities actively choosing which aspects of change to embrace and which traditions to maintain. They're making conscious decisions about their future rather than simply being passive victims of historical forces. Some Higaonon individuals have become advocates for indigenous rights at national and international levels. Others work to develop sustainable tourism initiatives that share their culture with outsiders while maintaining control over how their stories are told. Still others focus on documenting traditional knowledge to ensure it's preserved for future generations. The crafts and arts of the Higaonon people reflect this same dynamic relationship with tradition and change. Their textiles incorporate traditional patterns and meanings while sometimes using new materials or techniques. Their music includes ancient chants alongside more contemporary expressions. They're not preserving their culture in amber, they're keeping it alive by allowing it to evolve. This brings us to perhaps the most important point about the Higaonon people and indigenous communities everywhere. They don't need to be saved by outsiders, and they're not museum pieces to be preserved unchanged. What they need is respect for their right to self-determination, support for their efforts to maintain their cultural identity on their own terms, and protection of their rights to their traditional territories. The Higaonon people have something to teach all of us about sustainable living, community cooperation, and maintaining connection to place in an increasingly disconnected world. But they're not teaching these lessons for our benefit. They're living them for their own survival and flourishing. Their story reminds us that there are many ways to be human, many ways to organize society, and many ways to relate to the natural world. In our globalized age, it's easy to assume that everyone wants the same things we want, or should live the way we live. The Higaonon people demonstrate that diversity of human experience isn't just interesting, it's essential. As we face global challenges like climate change, social inequality, and environmental degradation, we need all the wisdom we can get. Indigenous communities like the Higaonon have been developing sustainable solutions to human problems for far longer than our industrial civilization has existed. They're not relics of the past. They're laboratories of alternative futures. The next time you hear about indigenous communities, I challenge you to think beyond the stereotypes. Don't romanticize their lives as some kind of primitive paradise, but don't dismiss them as backwards either. See them as what they are: fellow humans navigating the challenge of living meaningful lives in a complex world, just like all of us. The Higaonon people of Mindanao represent resilience, wisdom, and the ongoing human capacity to adapt while maintaining identity. Their story is still being written, and it deserves our respect, our attention, and our support for their right to write it themselves. If you enjoyed this journey into understanding the Higaonon people and want to continue exploring the rich diversity of human cultures with the respect and depth they deserve, like, comment, and subscribe for more authentic cultural storytelling only on Heritage Finder.